All right, guys. Hey, happy Friday. Just looking to see what the date was. Today is March 11th, Friday, March 11th. You're hanging out with my community manager, the community built by, for, managed by community managers. As always, we have a simultaneous Twitter chat at hashtag CMGR Hangout, where I know a bunch of you are hanging out right now. So, hey, guys, what's up? And if you love what you're seeing today and maybe you have some ideas, please head over to our website at www.mycmgr.com, where you can click participate. We have a little form you fill out, and that's really how we get the ideas for every Friday and what to hang out and talk about. So today's topic is all about 6 degrees of separation. And just recently, Facebook sent out a little app, I guess, that you could see how close you were connected to the world of Facebook. And I think Mark Zuckerberg was a 3-point something. Sherry and I were talking. We both felt pretty cool because we were 2-point something, and meaning we were more connected than the inventor of Facebook on Facebook. Which I don't know. That just felt cool. But maybe he leads a private life. Anyways, I know that 6 degrees of separation has been a theory that's been around, I think, since like the 1920s. Just this idea of you could connect to anyone in the world by asking a friend of a friend of a friend up to 6 times. There's been a movement called the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon to see how closely connected you were to Kevin Bacon, and so forth. So, hey, Sherry, how did we come up with today's topic? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, sure. So I think a month ago we had Scott on along with Jono and Randy and Jen, and there was a follow-up topic. To be honest, none of us can remember what that was. So Scott was brainstorming topics with me again, like he does. I have a giant Post-it note, not gonna lie, on my computer of ideas from Scott. But and one of them was degrees of separation, because it was shortly after this research came out, and so we kind of talked about it and figured out how to really expand that into something useful that can apply to community, and really just a discussion around it that might take longer than a 5-minute intro on the Facebook article. So yeah, that's basically where it came from.
Sounds good. So now comes the time where we introduce everyone. So Sherry, why don't we just start with you and work our way down the horn?
Sure. Hey, everybody. I'm Sherry Rohde. I'm the community manager at Magento, as well as co-produce CMGR Hangout here with Brew.
Hey, Scott. How are you? Thanks for hanging out with us.
Hey, so I'm Scott Moore. I'm an online community consultant. Been doing it for a very long time, and that's it. That's what I do.
Sweet. Hey, Mark. How's your Friday?
Going well. I'm in the middle of a house move, but I'm glad to take some time to be with you all here today. I'm a sociologist, and I'm interested in mapping and visualizing social media networks.
Very cool. And Casey, how are you? Good to have you here again.
Thanks for having me back. I am a social media manager for the Cisco Talent Brand team, and all kinds of social media, photography, writing. That's kind of what I'm into.
Cool. Well, I am Brew, the Director of Awesome with BTC Revolutions and co-producer here at MyCMGR with Sherry. And we're just going to jump into the first question. I know I blabbled a little bit about it in the beginning, but overall, what is the 6 degrees of separation model, and where did it come from? Because I just said 1920s. I don't really know the whole history. Who's got that for us?
I'm calling out Mark on that one.
That's what I was waiting for.
I think my screen, my camera may have frozen, but can you still hear me?
Yes, we can, loud and clear.
Right. So Stanley Milgram is an American sociologist, and in the 60s, he was very interested in how people's local social networks worked, and he came up with this idea that he was going to mail 2,000 letters to people in the Midwest of the United States, and he was going to suggest to them that they forward the letter to someone who might know a stockbroker in Boston, a particular person. They weren't supposed to, this was before the internet, this was the early 60s, they weren't supposed to just look up this person and send it to them. They were supposed to send it to someone who might know that person more than they do. And this notion of 6 degrees came from the fact that some of these letters actually arrived, and on average, they jumped through 6 hoops to get there. And so this notion of 6 degrees was born. It later became a Broadway play in which the idea was that so long as somebody presented themselves to you as a friend of a friend, you were willing to engage in trust at a much higher level than you would otherwise. And this actually was exploited by a con artist in this movie. I think a play and then a movie. So the notion of 6 degrees, which then later became a .com startup, and then later morphed into what we're now more familiar with as social network platforms like LinkedIn and Facebook. These are all social networks. But the notion of 6 degrees is this idea that it's a small world, that if you have a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend, you probably could reach any other human being on the planet if there were 6 of these people. The news from Facebook is that that number has now gone down because more people are connected to more people, and it is now easier, or the distance, the number of hops, the path length, if you will, in the technical terminology of network theory, the number of hops has dropped. And for any given person, it might be different because you might be more or less connected. If you have only one friend, then your path is at least n+1, however connected your friend is, and the extra hop to get to that friend. Some people, however, have a lot more connectivity. Think about, let's say, a Hollywood agent who might know 5,000 people. But there are different kinds of connectivity, because imagine the person who knows 5 Hollywood agents. And so network theory is all about measuring the difference between knowing 5,000 people or knowing 5 people who each know 5,000 people. And that's a kind of indirect connectivity. So the 6 degrees of separation model might make sense for community managers in that it's a gateway into the notion of network theory. And once you start to, as I like to say, think link, once you start to see your community as a network of relationships rather than a collection of individuals or a pile of messages, in sociology and network theory, we see it as something that has a shape. It has a structure. And different structures might matter because you might be in the wrong structure. You might have the right number of people, but they may have all essentially held hands in the wrong way. Or not held hands at all. That would be bad.
Wow. That blows my mind. I love this idea of a shape of a network.
I can even show you some pictures. Could you join me at NodeXLGraphGallery.org? That's NODE, letter X, letter L, NodeXL, Graph Gallery, that's all one word, and then a .org at the end. So I'll type it in our chat. I don't know if our viewers can see that. And if we
there we go.
Look at that. Yeah, so NodeXL Graph Gallery is like a kind of Flickr, but for networks. And our users are able to upload these pictures, these slices of data. And if you click through, you get to a more detailed report and map. Top of the list here is South by Southwest. Do you want to look at that one? Or we could also look at some community manager topics. I think.
Yep. Yeah, I actually have the South by one open right now for the viewers.
Oh, perfect. Why don't we dig into that? So if you click on it, you'll get a bigger version of the image, and then if you scroll down a little bit, it'll tell you this is 10,000 people, and they all are on this graph because they said the word South by Southwest, and that happened over a 5-hour period. So South by Southwest must be one of the premier social media events on Earth, and so it's doing social media better perhaps than anybody else ever. So that's a lot of traffic, 10,000 people in under 5 hours, and I don't think it's even started really yet. So the question becomes, if you were going to look at 10,000 people, could you quickly tell me who are the, let's say, 10 most important ones? And we would ask you to scroll down and look at the people in this list. And I'll note, if you look at the follower count, they're not in any particular order, bigger, smaller, some very small by comparison to others. I mean, there is the President of the United States, 6.67 million followers. There's somebody here with 1,000 followers, 540 followers. Is this random? No. This is ranked not by follower count, not by tweet count, but how much in the middle of things are they? This magic number, we call it betweenness centrality. And it is considering just the set of relationships among the set of people who in this 5-hour period said the word South by Southwest. And so it's a way of looking at importance that's slightly different. Oh, please, continue. Yeah.
If you don't mind, if I could jump in here, some of these concepts we're going to get to a little bit later. So maybe if we could jump into question 2 and work through this a little bit, and then come back to if there's any visuals that kind of back up what we're saying.
Sure. Well, so number 2 is it accurate? Well, yes. There's this notion of a path length. It's how many people does it take for me to get to you? And so, you know, that might just be a friend of a friend. It might be that, you know, I have to have a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend before I can get to a person. But how useful is it in practice for, let's say, a community manager? And I would say a network theory person would say, well, the longest short path, if you will, which is the path that would be the greatest distance from two people who least know each other, that length tells me something about your community. If it's really, really long, it means that you actually have lots of little communities which may be poorly connected to each other. If it's really, really low, it may mean that you have one big community and everybody really knows everybody. So the difference between, let's say, a city of many neighborhoods and a village with really one small community in it.
Cool. Scott, Casey, do you have any thoughts on this so far?
What question are we on?
If you can jump in, I guess, on if you had anything to add to question 1 or question 2, if there's any accuracy or usefulness that we can derive from the 6 degrees of separation model, and if so, what that might be, and then we'll get into some other concepts after that.
So as a practitioner, I'm kind of, I admit, I'm skeptical about the detail of accuracy presented, particularly by the Facebook model. Because what does it mean when somebody is connected, you know, when Mark Zuckerberg has, what was it, 3.17 and somebody else has 2.95, or, I mean, what does it really mean? And I think that that's when we get into the other concepts that Mark is really talking about, when we get into shaping those. Because you can calculate, I did this myself, found a formula for it, and you can calculate, basically, you take the number of Facebook connections in the world, 1 billion, and you take your friends, and you divide 1 billion by your friends, but you use natural log, so there's some math going on in there. But you can literally type this into the into Google Calculator, and come up with a really close number to what Facebook is presenting as this number. And so the utility, I question the utility of focusing on the number. And I think that it's more interesting to say, okay, 6 degrees of separation is we're all connected to each other in different ways, but then let's get beyond the number and let's start talking about what does it mean to have a shape, and what are the different things that matter in those particular shapes.
I would add to Scott's point that being more connected to the wrong people is not necessarily a good thing. So merely being very well connected doesn't mean that you're really connected to good people. And so I guess my thought is that the takeaway here is that if the 6 degrees theory is right, and I believe it has been empirically validated that, in fact, we are connected to a lot of people who are connected to other people, and that I could have a certain reachability, that, you know, we all know somebody who knows somebody in another country. But the takeaway is that the result is that the world is what is known as a small world. That the total population of the planet is rarely the population you're interested in addressing. Small worlds theory suggests that there are these worlds, and people live within them, and that the population you want to address is often much smaller than the total population.
But to get to those worlds, you have to still connect. So a bad connection might still lead you there.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Whether it's good to be super connected, or connected to the connectors, right? I'm going to jump us into question 3 here, and this is a question I actually I'm interested to learn more about this from you guys, about other concepts for looking at networks and connections. So 6 degrees is kind of one of them. Like what else is there?
I want to hear from Casey.
I know. Yeah, go ahead, Casey.
I think you guys are the authorities on this, so I'm just going to kind of follow along what you guys have to say here, because I'm going to be honest. I mean, this is all stuff I'm still learning. So, oh, sorry, I didn't know if my mic was still on. So yeah.
Well, I know, I don't know what concepts behind it, but I know that I'd recently been playing with the Get Littlebird, or the Littlebird tool, and it seems like they have a looking at different topics happening on the internet. People are talking about them, and who's connected to who, and how many sub-communities are within that community, and then and then sort of like what are the things those sub-communities are talking about, which I kind of found useful in just doing research, just trying to find new communities to tap into and what you could relate to them and things like that.
Yeah, and Brew, I think you hit on an important one, and Mark and I have done, actually on our podcast, we've talked about similar ideas, and it is that adjacent community. It is those adjacent people within the network, because it's the shape of the network. Mark mentioned it, and I think it's important because thinking about just connections in this broad form isn't necessarily helpful, but when you start to see what the shape of that network is, or the network you're participating, or the network you want to participate in, it's really interesting, and it's more useful when you start seeing the shape. If it's a hub and spoke, it looks more like it's a broadcast model, right? It's an audience model. People are paying attention to a small group of people. Whereas if it gets dense and crazy, like the graphic you guys used for this show is one of NodeXL's graphs about the CMGR Hangout. And if you look, we intuit this as people who are participating in this, but if you look at it, you'll see clusters that are interconnected to each other, and that's the more dense those connections are, the more likely you have a community shape. And so sometimes also it's important to see, your community, the topic area you're talking about is here, but there's a group of people over here that are talking about something similar or adjacent, or maybe the exact opposite, or they're taking a different stand on it. And so seeing how you are in relation to that also matters. Do you want to reach out to them, and who do you want to reach out to? And I'm going to let Mark take it from here, because we've talked about this, and I don't want to steal all his thunder about B-list influencers and some of that stuff.
Oh well, yeah. I mean, the utility of the concept, I think, is that instead of seeing a collection of messages, instead of just seeing a collection of people, you see their relationships. And those relationships in aggregate, these connections, when you look at a collection of connections, it has a shape. And things like Graph Gallery, the NodeXL Graph Gallery, are all about showing you not only the shape of a network, but as you page through it, I think you'll see, well, wait a second, that shape is different than the other shape. You'll start to see certain patterns occur over and over and over again. And indeed, in a report we did with Pew Research, which I can share with you, I can show you right now. Here you go. I'll put the link in the chat there. We tried to document the kinds of patterns that we saw, and we ended up seeing 6 patterns. There's a pattern, if you scroll to the bottom of that page, it's a figure called figure 3. It's almost at the very bottom, but that's exactly what I'd like people to be seeing. That's good, but keep going. Almost there we go. That's figure 3. If you do this, if you make a map, if you make a network of social media, you end up with these patterns, and after a while the patterns start looking like other patterns you've already seen. And we ended up coming out with 6 categories. We are not suggesting that there is not a 7th category. We are inviting people to document the 7th or 8th or 9th category. Maybe it's like the periodic table of the elements. You can always make, you know, transuranium or something. Maybe you can find other patterns. But we are pretty sure that these are some of the atomic units, or really, for my metaphor, the basic molecular structures of social media. These are patterns that routinely occur. You can find them in Graph Gallery easily. And they illustrate pattern processes, social processes like we don't really like each other. That's a social process. That's controversy, polarization. 2 groups of people talk about the same topic, but they will not talk to each other about it. And so rather than social media really becoming a place where we argue with our opponents, it's really a place where we agree with people about who we collectively hate. And that's the pattern you see there with divided or polarized crowds. It's a very common one. The image you see at the bottom there, you see that they're mirrors. Those are real data sets. And then the colored circles at the top are sort of the schematic representation of the graph. The one at the bottom is people talking about U.S. tax policy. Clearly, we don't agree. And there are 2 groups. And in the report, you can actually drill down and see, well, what words are being used by group 1 versus group 2, what hashtags, what URLs, and you start to get a sense of, oh, these people like the president, and oh, these people do not. And it's pretty clear that everybody who doesn't like the president is in one camp, and everybody who does like the president is in another camp. And you can tell them apart by the URLs that they link to and things like that. But there are other patterns. It's not all about hate and dislike and polarization. There's also tight crowd. And things like community manager chat are good examples. That's, in fact, the example below is community manager chat from a couple of years ago. Community managers don't hate each other. They don't turn their backs on the other kind of community manager. They all kind of connect to each other. And while they have different themes or topics of interest, they're very cross-connected, lots of bridging going on. So we call that the tight crowd or the unified pattern. The other 4 are as different can be. There's the nobody connects to anybody pattern, the mostly nobody connects to anybody, but there's a little bit of connection on the side pattern, and then there's the wagon wheel with the arrows pointing in and the wagon wheel with the arrows pointing out. And these 2 patterns tell us about broadcast versus support. Support is when things like Dell Listens or Dell Cares or at United or any of these support accounts try to answer lots of people's complaints. The flip side of that is the broadcast network, and that's when hundreds of people all retweet one account. They create an audience that person becomes famous. They're a celebrity. They're popular. But these patterns really help us then decode. It's like the Rosetta Stone of networks. If you then go back to Graph Gallery, you could start to say, oh, well, there's that pattern, and there's a little of this. And we're not suggesting that there's only purity, that's all of one or none of the other. There's hybrids. There's a little of this and a little of that. But clearly some of the maps are much more of one thing or the other. And within the maps, you can then be guided to the most influential people, the people who support a position versus the people who oppose that position, the people who talk about the same topic in the same way but in different languages, and therefore not to each other. So, you know, you can almost always find a Spanish language cluster in an international topic. You can find the Portuguese people. So it depends on the nature of your community, whether or not the divisions are perhaps based on language or politics, or maybe it's technology. You know, I don't use that router. I don't use that tool, so I don't talk about it.
Quick question on these shapes. Is there a what with I think it was last week or the week before we were discussing niche communities and kind of this concept of like, hey, sometimes you have this overall larger topic, but within that, you know, there's these clusters of very specific topics that people are talking about. Is that kind of like, would that look like a little bit more of like the unified shape, or I'd just love to hear kind of like this whole, you know, how niche communities would relate to what we were just talking about. If someone could grab that.
So I'll jump on it. So I think the short answer is yeah. So I've seen a number of the NodeXL graphs, and it's like one of those hybrids. You'll see this larger network that's kind of chaotic, and then off in some corner you might see that. And then it's a matter of, do you want to, you know, you can zero in on that, start cutting out some of the data, and get a closer look at what that niche community looks like internally on its own. So I think the short answer is yes, and I think what's fascinating is these tools haven't yet it's not the tool's fault. People haven't yet taken these tools and applied them to things like forums. I mean, we're really not doing that, and I think I advocate for that because I think there's so much that you can learn about what's going on in your community beyond what you know, and half of it might be it supports what you know, but it's always the other half where it goes like, oh, I didn't realize those people were talking to each other, or off on the side, these people tend to talk similarly. So the short answer is yeah, and I think we can learn a lot by thinking about these the ideas of the niche communities within the larger network. I always use the concept that communities and groups, the network always exists. There's always this larger network around us, and groups form they distill out of the network, and sometimes they distribute, or they go back into the network. So it's a dynamic thing. If you look at a network one day, if you look at a network the next day, the shapes might be slightly different. So it's a moving target, but it's yeah. So the short answer is yeah. These niche communities, they have shapes too.
That's really cool. How do we decide, you know, when we're mapping out a network, who to include? Is it just always keyword based?
Yeah, that's a great question. The two essential questions of a network analysis come down to what's in the network, and the second question is, what are the ways that they are enabled to connect to each other? So is it just people? Could a business be a part of the network? Is a computer a part of the network? What is the network made up of? In some cases, networks are made out of user accounts and the messages they create, or the pages they edit, or the photos they create. Those could be nodes in a network. So that question is a really important one. What defines the boundary of the population? Is it just by search term? No, that's one good way. Wouldn't it be nice to have all the people who mention your business or your product or your brand or your competitor? That's a useful thing. There are many other ways of defining a population. Another example is the already known population. You have a list. You have a group of people you already know, and you just want to know how are they connected to each other. We support that feature too. We have a Twitter list importer, and one neat example of this is C-SPAN maintains a list. It's called Members of U.S. Congress. There's 535 people on the list, and you can run it through our tool, NodeXL, and it'll go to the list, and it'll say, of these 535 people, let's go read their last couple of hundred tweets and find out in what way do they mention each other. Do they ever mention each other? And it turns out that, guess what? There's political polarization in the United States. Apparently, there's these two political parties. They don't like each other. But there's more interesting information in that data. It turns out that people who are of different parties but are in the same region do talk to each other. Because, you know, hey, we're both celebrating the highway funds that have come to our state this week. So we can actually start to see regional cross-connection across the divide that is imposed by party. So you can do this with a population that's known or a population that's unknown. An example of an unknown population is a new map that just appeared on Graph Gallery. I did the Twitter network of the word CMGR Hangout. So this is a snapshot of us tweeting now. Maybe we could share that with our viewers.
Yep, I was just trying to bring it up here. Oh, wrong URL.
And while you're doing that, I want to jump in just a tiny bit and hopefully support some of what Mark is saying. In that, this is where, so I'm going to kick 6 degrees in the shins again. This is where the concept starts to fall down and where these network concepts become more useful, in that this map of CMGR Hangout, it is going to include people who, if you were to follow a 6 degrees, you know, follower view, and 6 degrees isn't only followers, I guess. So, but this is people who are actually using the hashtag and in some way and participating in it, and so they're not necessarily following each other. If we were to take these people and we were to only look at who is following each other on Twitter, it would look different, and it would probably look a lot smaller, because there's some folks there I can see down in the middle who are not really talking. They're not really connected to other people normally, but they are participating in the Hangout. And hey, thanks, cool. And so I think that what it is matters a whole lot, and it does matter. And the other thing is, when somebody presents to you a tool to measure network or to show you a graph display like LinkedIn's network or any of these other places that might say, hey, we're going to show you a network map, ask what it is that they are calling a connection or they are calling an edge, because it's going to matter to you to understand what that network really is saying.
If you use the wheel, or
yeah, I think someone actually on Twitter asked that question, which was just, what is a connection? Like, when you're talking about connections, what are you identifying as a connection?
In this case, it's reply and mention, but it could also be follow or favorite or friend or reply, comment, vote. It depends on the platform. And so some platforms have different kinds of connection capacity. And so here you're seeing that we can zoom in and start to see some of the detail on who's connecting to who. And then if you mouse over some of those people, you should see their last tweet. There you go. You'll see who they are and what their last tweet was. So yeah, defining what are the people or the things in the graph and how are they connected. These are the fundamental two questions of network theory. What are the things and how are they connected?
Cool. All right, so there's a question here about centrality. I don't know what that is, so good thing I'm asking the questions. What is centrality, and how does it come into play with influence?
Right, right. Centrality is much simpler than it seems. And I'm going to explain it with a story. There are two divisions in a large corporation, sales and marketing. And there are some people in sales who know lots of people in sales. And imagine that you're somebody in sales and you know 200 people in sales. But there is another person in sales and they know far fewer people. But they know somebody in marketing. Now, who's more important? Now, you know, the answer to that question is define importance. So we're going to use a particular definition in which the person with the connection to marketing is more important. So work with me on that one. If you are the only person to have a connection to another group, we call you a bridge. And we calculate a number, which is how much are you the only way to get from here to there. And that number is called betweenness centrality. Now, what about that big shot in sales who knew 200 people? He or she also has their own kind of centrality. They have something called degree centrality. They just have a lot of connections. But betweenness centrality is beautiful, if you will. I'm a sociologist, so you'll forgive me. I think betweenness centrality is beautiful. Because somebody with very, very few connections can pop to the top of the list because they are the bridge. And, you know, depending on how you look at things, you might say, well, I don't care about bridges who have only a few connections and are the only path to marketing, because I'm all about sales. God bless you, sir. You know, you have lots of connections in sales. Good for you. Someday, it might come to pass that you need to know somebody in marketing. When that day comes, the person who has betweenness is the gatekeeper. And usually when I'm trying to explain this, I show a picture of the Golden Gate Bridge, and I like to ask the question, what do you often find on one end of a bridge or the other? And that's a rhetorical question. The answer is a toll booth. And the idea is that whoever is a bridge often can extract a tax, a toll, a fee, whether it's just in goodwill or maybe it's actually in, you know, hard cash money, because you're the broker, you're the deal maker, because you introduce two people who would otherwise not be able to connect. So being between means being in the middle of things. One other way to do this is to take your two hands, put them in fists in front of you, and then take your index fingers. Yeah, there you go. Index fingers. Touch the two index fingers to each other, right? Now imagine, you know, in one hand you have these 5 people and they're all connected to each other, and in the other hand there's the 5 people and they're all connected to each other, and the index finger is the only person in group 1 and the other index finger is the only person in group 2 who connects to the other hand, and therefore they are the bridge. And so you can actually count this. There's some math. We don't have to care about that. Computers do the math for us, and they count the how much are you like the index finger who touches the other index finger. You're the bridge. So there's lots of kinds of centrality. I mentioned another kind earlier. There's the Hollywood agent who knows 5,000 people. We call that degree centrality. But there's the person who knows 5 Hollywood agents. That's not betweenness. That's called eigenvector centrality. They come in flavors. And if you can remember the word eigenvector centrality and use it at a cocktail party soon, I guarantee that a venture capitalist will write you a check right there. Right there. Just have to work it into your conversation. You know, eigenvector centrality. And why? Because eigenvector centrality was the gear on which Google turned. Eigenvector centrality is how much do pages that have a lot of connections connect to this page? And so, you know, network concepts are not that familiar, but things like betweenness and eigenvector and degree centrality capture different ways of being in the middle of a crowd. And so once you're familiar with them, you can use them almost the way you might use longitude and latitude. Once you have your GPS, you kind of get interested in longitude and latitude in a way you might not have been earlier. But you really want to know where on that map the little blinky dot is going to be. So if you seek the people at the center of your community, these different flavors of centrality are good guides to bring you to those people. And they're resistant to manipulation. You can't just buy followers, because they have to actually talk to you. You can't just tweet a lot, because it doesn't matter how much you tweet. It really depends on how do other people behave towards you. That's the critical thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, in previous talks we've had is, really like I kind of look at the ability to connect with super connectors is your quickest way to gain access. I think we definitely know people who you're like, man, those people, that certain person just knows everyone, and they're always connecting people and everything else. And it's interesting because that's really the role of a community manager, as we talk about different communities, right? Your role as a community manager is to connect people within a community. So when you are a community manager dealing with other community managers, it'd be interesting to kind of see how many degrees of separation or how connected just the community manager community is, to different.
So to that point, if you scroll down on that page, it should bring you to the top influencer section, where we give you a quick button to follow the influencers. And then we created this thing we call the smart tweet. And if you if you enter a community you're not familiar with, you don't know who the leaders are, this report tells you who those leaders are and allows you to quickly follow them. But part of engagement is not just following; it's actually conversation. It's engagement. And so what we could do is, if you click the smart tweet button, if it works, what it's going to do is write a rough draft of a tweet for you based on the analysis of the content of that influencer. So maybe pick one. I picked Kristen, but you could pick anybody. And then it will basically analyze what are the words and hashtags that are, the technical word is salient. They're the most important words to that person. And then we tack on, quote, our hashtag and our URL. That could be your hashtag and your URL. And we invite you to write in the middle of that something that actually makes some sense to my community manager. If you're going to talk to that account, you might want to mention SocialBiz, you might want to talk about communities, and the hashtag CMGR is probably a good idea.
Way cool.
And something I want to bring up is that the super connectors are great. There's this thing that Mark and I have talked about, which I mentioned before, the B-listers, and these are people who have high betweenness centrality. They're the people who are right here between all these other people. And the thing is, they may not be super connected, but they're important. And they may not have a lot of followers, but if you contact them and you start start chatting them up and start developing a relationship with them, they can be extremely grateful for that. So when you go to a super connector, sometimes they're too busy to bother with you. They've got so much else going on, you're not on their radar. But talking to folks who are well connected, but they're not necessarily, they don't have the degree centrality, can be helpful for you to kind of introduce yourself into a new community that you want to talk to. It's a different way of growing your community, not necessarily the fastest way of growing your community, but there are communities who might want to grow a little more slow, but they want to develop these kind of deeper relationships.
Well, I think, it's interesting to say that, Scott, because like from a brand perspective, those are the types of people I look at for all of the time. Kind of like we just call them up and comers, right? Like, so whether it's like different YouTube communities or YouNow communities or this or that, just finding people who you can tell, are starting to gain some traction potentially. But as you said, most importantly, they are thankful for the interactions, or kind of working with them from an advocacy standpoint. And sometimes those those people turn into like the best wins over time, right? Because if at any point they break out of that in-betweener, or or like you said, the B list, right, and they become A list, suddenly you have somebody who's dedicated to the brand who started out small,
Or they may never become an A-lister, but they may connect you to a community that has A-listers in it, or just are influential,
Yeah.
at all. So yeah, it's good. It's good all around. I mean, especially when reaching out.
So I just wanted to offer a practical tip. I've just shared my screen. I don't know if that's visible, but
yeah, we can see it.
Okay. How would you do this if you're not interested in doing it with Twitter? I mean, we automate that. What if you already have your own community, you have a message board, you have a discussion forum? How do you do this? And the answer is, if you can talk to your database person and do a query, you can write a file called an edge list. And that format is pretty straightforward. It's name 1, name 2, stuff about what happened between the two of them, and then stuff about person 1, stuff about person 2. We like to say a network is born whenever two GUIDs are joined, so globally unique identifiers, 2 email addresses, 2 phone numbers, 2 user IDs, whatever it is. You give me 2 of them, and you tell me that A did something with B at a time. Maybe you give me the message. Then if you did that, you could conceivably put it into a spreadsheet. It might look like this. If you do that, within a few more clicks, you get network. And you would have an analysis of who is what we like to think of as the mayor of your hashtag, or your community, or your discussion group. We want to know, are there sub-communities? And because the tool also does content analysis, what are they talking about in community group 1B versus 1A? Are they linking to different things? Are they using hashtags if they, on your community, use that convention? But they're probably using URLs, and they have to use words. It's one of the requirements. And so we do an analysis of words and word pairs. We may not see hashtags, but we're going to see words, and there's a really good chance we're going to see URLs. And so we're going to count them separate, because those are sort of magic words. And so if you can get your data into this format, within a few more clicks, we're going to show you a network and a report that's going to tell you who is the mayor of your community.
Awesome. So how does all of this play into building a community strategy?
Yeah. So I think what we'd have to look at is the idea that because there are different kinds of communities, they're not all equally good for all of your purposes. So, for example, what we find is that we talked about this. There are the 6 different kinds of communities. That there are sometimes divided communities, and sometimes there are unified communities. If yours is divided, you might want to be the healer. You might want to be the bridger. You might want to measure how much you've been able to bridge the divide. In community management, a simple metric like density might be one of your KPIs. It's not posts per day. It's not about total number of users. It's about the density of connections among them. And so if you had 10 people, those 10 people could connect to each other in 100 different ways. But what if you only saw 20 of those connections? You'd say that that was a relatively low density graph. It's only 20% connected. And so your community doesn't have to be 100% connected, because once you get over 100 people, it's almost impossible for everybody to know everybody. But are you a bus station, or are you a town? Do people just come and go? And maybe if you're a bus line, you want a bus station. It's okay to be a bus station. But if you're the architect of a community center, and what you ended up with is a bus station, then that might be defined as failure. And so the right metric is not how many. The right metric is almost always derived from how connected.
I'll jump in with another take on this. Is again going back to the conceptual. One of the things that using network analysis, or even just thinking about it in terms of network analysis, is we get away from communities as homogeneous, monolithic things, which often happens even when we're trying to talk about, because we talk about this in the singular, our community, and it really helps you. Utilizing these tools allows you to plan ahead and say, well, we're not going to have a monolithic community. We might start small and it might branch off. Well, how's that going to look? And when do we know that that's a right time? So, for example, this might be a little bit more tactical than strategy, but as part of your strategy, it might be we are going to start small with and this is a typical strategy. We're going to start small. We're going to have one space where people are going to be talking, and we'll branch off as there seems to be a need. Well, utilizing this, you can, because from your perspective, it's one space, everyone's talking. But when a need starts to branch out, when there is a node, say, or no, that's the wrong word. When there's a seed of a new community forming, this can give you advance warning of what that's going to be, so you can actually get ahead of it and plan, so that as it starts to grow, you've got the spaces in there, rather than necessarily waiting for it to get to a point where it's big enough that it's actually pushing at the edges of your space. And again, so I mean that's a matter of strategic growth and divergence. And then again, we talked about outreach. It's definitely a helpful outreach tool, because it allows you to get a quick map, literally, in that kind of graphical way of, you're going to go to a new city, you've never been there before, you buy a guidebook. Well, these kind of serve as your initial guidebook as to what does the land look like, and where's the local coffee shop, and where's, the ones that people are talking about, are they talking about your brand in different ways? For example, as a global strategy, this could definitely be used in terms of, we want to go find out if we want to branch out and put a community effort into a language area, or into a geographic area, and we don't necessarily speak the language, and it would take a huge amount of analysis to get somebody to go over there and start figuring this out. You do a network analysis of this, that map is going to look like those 6 archetypes, regardless of what language is being spoken. And so that's a real easy entry into this. I've done this in the past, where I've asked Mark to do, like for CMAD, to go do maps of non-English CMAD communities and see what those communities are looking like, and see what are they sharing. And it's a revelation to see what different folks are sharing around the world locally to their own interconnected communities.
So we have a little bit of time left, and always this is kind of one of the more popular questions about tools. So we've been talking about NodeXL. Like what other tools are there to help us identify? First of all, identify networks, right? And then visualize as well. So like, is it a big open gamut? Is there only a few tools? Would love to hear about that.
Well, quick shout out to the guys at Gephi, or Gephi, GEPHI.org. Gephi.org is possibly the most beautiful social network diagramming tool on earth right now. We're not as pretty, but they're French, so they get an upper, they sort of a national ability to be prettier. But then there's us. There are other tools. Some of them get quite expensive. Netminer is an SNA tool from Korea. There are, of course, things like Palantir for enterprises. Those get a little pricey. but then there are also quite a number of tools for software developers. So if you are a programmer, there are many R libraries, Python libraries. There's tools like Sigma.js for the web browser display. I think you were clicking through one of our interactive graphs there that's using Sigma.js. So depends on whether or not you're a developer. For the end user, the main tools are Gephi, something called UCINet, another one called Pajek, P-A-J-E-K, Pajek. That's Slovenian for spider. And last but not least, I hope, is NodeXL at nodexlgraphgallery.org.
Cool, thank you.
I know too. I was talking to Scott yesterday about this, and my friend Shannon, who's been on here before, she worked with a tool called Maven Social, and so they used similar concepts in the blogging community because they found that not necessarily everyone who is like, oh, I'm an influencer, obviously, and like has tons of followers are the most influential. So for them, it was a great way to really dig into maybe this person has a much smaller network, but it's a much more influential network, and they were able to identify those users as well as they could track campaigns through it to see really who is coming through on those campaigns and who was actually influencing.
That's pretty cool. I definitely, from the advertising side of things, a lot of talk is shifting towards, kind of spreading out across actually more influential blogs that maybe aren't hitting great on, as big on the stats that are used to show, from a PR perspective, which are the big hitters. But sometimes those smaller blogs are actually the ones read by the right people, and often will gain more popularity and more spread than some of the bigger sites that are getting automatic retweets and shares and stuff like that.
We are in praise of the B list.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, guys. This was fascinating. Sherry, what do we got for next week? Did I put you on the spot?
Sorry, I knew that question was coming, but I was on a different tab. I had to get back and then unmute myself. Next week, we're actually talking about lessons learned from gamification. I put out a tweet earlier. I need to follow up with some people, but I actually have a pretty full panel at this point, so it should be really good.
Fantastic. Well, hey, everybody, have a great weekend. Remember to set your clocks back if you forward. I'm sorry. Boy, I'd really mess. Yeah, everyone just set them back. That'd be fun. Gosh, that reminds me of one time accidentally sending out an ad. Okay, anyways, So I just threw myself off. We will see you guys next Friday. Have a great weekend. Daylight savings this weekend. Okay, bye.